The phone rang at 9:23 p.m. The voice said, "They're going to kill David Ochoa tomorrow morning." I knew that voice. Frank Martinez, Union Man, the one whose life I'd destroyed in 1964. Same way they destroyed me, Mr. Redford. Only this time, when that hospital collapses, David's name will be on the inspection reports. They'll make sure he's the one who gets blamed for approving faulty steel that kills children. I was 48, reviewing scripts in my Sundance office. Pacific Construction Group. I'd heard whispers about their methods. David Ochoa found the same safety violations I found 21 years ago. They're firing him at 8 a.m. tomorrow. Richard Kellerman's going to destroy him the same way he destroyed me. Frank hung up. I sat there remembering 1964. I was 27, filming a documentary about workplace safety. Frank Martinez was shop steward at Consolidated Steel, building a high-rise downtown. "These welds are failing," Frank had told me, showing me cracks in load-bearing joints 15 stories up. "This building comes down in an earthquake." He needed me to film the evidence. 30 seconds of footage that would save lives. I chose my career over his courage. 3 days later, they fired Frank for disrupting productivity. My documentary won awards. Frank became a night security guard, blacklisted forever. The Northridge earthquake brought down floors 15 through 20, exactly as Frank predicted. Empty building, holiday morning. If it had been business hours, dozens would have died, because I was too afraid to film 30 seconds of truth. Now someone else was about to pay for my cowardice. I drove to Orange County at dawn, found David Ochoa at his kitchen table feeding breakfast to a 6-month-old daughter. The baby had Down syndrome. Medical bills were crushing them. David showed me photographs, steel beams with welds that wouldn't hold, falsified inspection reports, a neonatal intensive care unit built on lies. "This is where Sophia was born," David said, his daughter grabbing at his safety badge. "When this building fails during an earthquake, they won't be able to evacuate the babies." His wife kissed him goodbye. "Keep your head down today. Don't make trouble." She had no idea he was 3 hours from career suicide. "What happens if you report the violations?" I asked. "Kellerman destroys me, but if I don't—" David looked at his daughter. "I become complicit in mass murder." I left his house and drove to a rest stop, threw up in the parking lot. 21 years of guilt hitting like a physical blow. I called my lawyer. "Find out everything about Richard Kellerman." Then I called Kellerman directly. "Mr. Kellerman, this is Robert Redford. Cancel your meeting with David Ochoa." Silence. Then, "I'm not sure what this concerns you." "You know what Kellerman tells every safety inspector?" Frank's words echoed in my head. "Gentlemen, there are 2 kinds of engineers, team players and unemployed players. Which kind are you?" I repeated his line back to him. "What do you want?" Kellerman asked. "Cancel the meeting. Address Ochoa's safety concerns. Or this story goes to every newspaper in California." Kellerman laughed. "Mr. Redford, I have more political connections than you have awards. I destroy people for a living." "Then we understand each other." Kellerman kept his word. Investigators examined my past. Stories leaked about Robert Redford harassing legitimate businesses. I kept mine. The LA Times ran photographs of faulty welds and falsified reports. David Ochoa was identified as the whistleblower. The counterattack was brutal. Environmental groups distanced themselves, political allies vanished, but it forced me to do what I should have done 21 years earlier. 60 Minutes. Morley Safer's camera rolling. "You witnessed safety violations in 1964 that could have killed people, but chose not to report them." "Correct." "Frank Martinez was fired for trying to report these violations?" "Yes." Why confess now? I looked into the camera. Because David Ochoa shouldn't have to choose between his family's security and other people's lives, because I finally have enough power to save someone instead of just feeling guilty about it. The confession aired. Some praised my honesty. Others questioned my motives. All of it made it impossible for Pacific Construction to quietly destroy David Ochoa. California launched an investigation. David's concerns were validated. Pacific Construction lost the contract, eventually declared bankruptcy. Kellerman was forced out. His final statement: "There are two kinds of people in this business, those who understand the difference between perfection and progress, and those who don't." Still using his favorite line, still missing the point. David became Chief Safety Inspector for the new company. The hospital was rebuilt to exceed earthquake standards. Frank Martinez was hired as Senior Safety Consultant. After 21 years as a night watchman, he was back in construction. But my confession cost relationships I'd spent decades building. Some friends decided they'd never really known who I was. They were partly right. Guilt over Frank Martinez had shaped my environmental work, my film choices, my public positions. But acknowledging that guilt didn't make the work less important. David Ochoa's daughter is 27 now. Same age I was when I chose silence over courage. She's an engineer, working for the firm that rebuilt her birth hospital. When Northridge hit, the structure didn't suffer a single failure. Frank Martinez retired last year, called to thank me for finding courage he'd never stopped believing I had. I'm 67. I know middle age was my last chance to fix what youth destroyed. After that, you just carry regrets until they become scars. But sometimes you get a phone call at 9:23 p.m. offering one more chance to choose courage over comfort. I'm in that same study now, looking at the same mountains, waiting for the phone to ring again. The phone rings differently now. It doesn't sound like an interruption, it sounds like redemption calling. The war with Kellerman lasted 6 weeks, but those weeks changed everything I thought I knew about power and responsibility. When Pacific Construction's investigators started digging into my past, they found exactly what I'd expected them to find: evidence of my 1964 cowardice. But instead of destroying me, the revelation forced me to confront what I'd been running from for 2 decades. Every environmental cause I'd supported, every film about justice I'd made, every speech about corporate responsibility, all of it had been shaped by guilt over Frank Martinez. I'd spent 21 years trying to atone for moral failure by supporting other people's courage, but I'd never found the strength to admit my own cowardice. The 60 Minutes interview was the hardest thing I'd ever done. Sitting across from Morley Safer, knowing millions of people were about to watch me confess to destroying a good man's life out of career ambition. Some people will say this confession is convenient timing, Safer pressed, that you're only admitting past mistakes because it serves your current agenda. They'd be partly right, I said. My environmental activism has been motivated by guilt, but that doesn't make the causes less important. It just makes my support more honest. When the interview aired, the reaction split exactly as I had expected. Environmental allies questioned whether they could trust someone whose passion came from personal guilt. Political friends wondered what other secrets I'd been hiding. Social invitations dried up. But David Ochoa kept his job. The hospital was rebuilt safely. Frank Martinez got his career back. And for the first time in 21 years, I could sleep without dreaming about buildings collapsing because I'd been too afraid to film 30 seconds of truth. Kellerman's final press conference stayed with me. Even in defeat, he couldn't admit that safety violations were about survival rather than perfectionism. His worldview was so fixed that he couldn't see past his own talking points. There are two kinds of people in this business: those who understand the difference between perfection and progress, and those who don't. He was still using his favorite line, still trying to frame conscience as impracticality. But his voice sounded hollow now, stripped of the authority it had once carried. The investigation that followed revealed decades of intimidation, cover-ups, and structural violations. Other safety inspectors came forward, sharing stories of threats and career destruction. The pattern was clear. Pacific Construction had been systematically silencing anyone who wouldn't ignore problems that could kill people. The victory came with costs I hadn't fully anticipated. When you confess to moral failure in public, people start questioning everything they thought they knew about you. Some collaborators decided they couldn't work with someone whose environmental activism had been motivated by personal guilt rather than pure conviction. Some friends concluded that if I'd hidden this failure for 21 years, what else had I been hiding? The questions were fair. I had spent 2 decades building a public image around principles I'd failed to uphold when it mattered most. My support for environmental causes, my choice of film projects, my political positions, all of it had been shaped by the need to atone for Frank Martinez, but acknowledging that guilt didn't make the work less important. If anything, it made it more honest. I'd supported environmental causes because I understood what it meant to stay silent while powerful people destroyed lives for profit. I'd made films about justice because I knew what injustice looked like from the inside. The confession also changed how I thought about power and responsibility. At 27, I'd been afraid that speaking up would cost me opportunities I might never get again. At 48, I'd learned that having real influence meant being willing to lose some of it for the right reasons. David Ochoa understood this in a way that impressed me. When reporters asked him about the pressure he'd faced to stay quiet about safety violations, he said something that stuck with me. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is make it impossible for people to ignore a problem they already know exists. That's what Frank Martinez had tried to do in 1964. That's what David had tried to do in 1985. The difference was that in 1985, I'd finally found the courage to make sure David didn't have to fight alone. Frank Martinez's call to thank me after his retirement was one of the most difficult conversations I'd ever had. Not because he was angry, he wasn't, but because his gratitude made me realize how much of his life had been shaped by my failure to act when action could have prevented his destruction. "You know what's strange?" Frank said. "All those years I thought my career was over because nobody would listen when I tried to tell the truth. Turns out I was just waiting for the right person to find the courage to listen." His forgiveness was harder to accept than his anger would have been. It reminded me that moral failures don't just hurt the people who make them. They hurt the people who depend on others to do the right thing when it matters. David Ochoa's daughter Sophia is 27 now, the same age I was when I chose silence over courage. She's an engineer herself, working for the firm that rebuilt the hospital where she was born. Sometimes I wonder if she knows that her father's career was saved by a man who'd spent 21 years regretting his own moral cowardice. Probably not. David's too modest to tell that story, and I'm too ashamed to claim credit for finally doing what I should have done decades earlier. But the hospital stands. When the Northridge earthquake hit in 1994, the structure that David redesigned didn't suffer a single failure. Every patient who survived in that building, every baby born safely, every surgery completed without structural collapse, all of it proof that moral courage delayed is not moral courage denied, as long as it arrives in time to save someone. The rebuilt hospital has delivered thousands of babies since 1985. David's safety protocols have been adopted by construction companies across California. Frank Martinez spent his final working years training young inspectors to identify the structural problems that had once cost him his career. I'm 67 years old now, sitting in the same study where Frank Martinez's phone call interrupted my comfortable distance from moral complexity. The mountains outside look the same, but I see them differently now. They no longer represent escape from responsibility. They represent the clarity that comes from finally accepting it. Middle age was indeed my last chance to use power to fix what youth had destroyed. After 67, you mostly just carry regrets until they become part of who you are, permanent reminders rather than wounds that can still heal. But sometimes, if you're fortunate, you get a phone call at 9:23 p.m. that offers one more chance to choose courage over comfort, truth over convenience, someone else's life over your own reputation. I'm waiting for that phone to ring again, because I've learned that moral failures can be repaired, but only if you're willing to admit them, while you still have the power to prevent them from destroying someone else. The phone rings differently now. It doesn't sound like an interruption anymore. It doesn't sound like a burden. It sounds like redemption calling, and I'm finally ready to answer.